Hello, my name is John Babb, and I'm in your class. And bear with me because I've never made a video like this. But this is my presentation on the misrepresentation of Native Americans in the U.S. And I think this comic right here really kind of sets the tone for what I'm presenting for. And it shows, I don't know if you can see it that great, but the girl, the guy is saying, "Wait, you're a Native American?" And he has this image in his head of what they look like. And it has the Washington Redskins helmet, which we'll talk about in a second. And it has Pocahontas and the Indians from the baseball, and just a bunch of different cultural misappropriations. So we'll start with the history of racial antipathy. And so that would be defined as any harsh or malicious intention or belief towards another race. So this kind of started at the beginning, and I have this picture here showing the Indians whenever the Pilgrims first arrived, or trying to depict it, where Christopher Columbus in his notes, I mean, you can see that he immediately views them as weaker race and as like he was superior. And so that's just a brief glimpse into what like the mentality was coming in to the relationship between white man and the Native Americans. And then that translates into the Western expansion, where Indians are being removed from their homes, and the Trail of Tears and everything, where you're just not really treating them as humans. And that's all because of this idea of your beliefs, your ideas are not as good, and you're a weaker people, which is obviously incorrect. So that transformed into Singing Redface eventually, where a non-Indigenous person pretends to be a Native American through music and often includes an inauthentic representation of the culture. So eventually moving on from the aggressive, now moving on to the non-physical aggression shown towards Native Americans, where media and music and movies start to depict Indians, but not actually asking them what they, giving them a voice. So just kind of deciding what their story actually is ourselves. So one example of that is the Peter Pan movie made by Disney, where the book picks, our textbook points out that the song "What Made the Red Man Red" is actually very culturally misappropriated in the sign language they're showing, and it's not even real sign language, and it's just making up something. Because when you're watching that and you're not in that culture, you don't understand, and you just take it for face value. And the lyrics themselves were really derogatory, in the fact that it wasn't even real English. It was like sentences like "we engine this," and it wasn't even a full complete sentence, because they wouldn't, even the lyricist, whoever wrote the song, didn't give credit to their ability to even really speak. And what does that say to an Indian child growing up and watching this movie, And then on top of everything, you have the traditional regalia that's just immediately, that's what you think of when you think of the Americanized Native American. The skinny body type, the long hair, the feathers in the hair, the not very much clothing on, which to some regards is a little bit true in certain areas, but it's not true of every Indian, and it's all you seem to get portrayed during this era, particularly in the John Wayne films, that era, where Indians weren't only being misappropriated in its the way we were putting them on screen and having white actors put red paint on. It was also in the the treatment of them during that time. And so there's also just the abuse on screen and attached with the misrepresentation of how they look and how they sound and how they do life. So moving on from that, there's also a thing called idealized sympathy, where non-native individuals put out overly sympathetic media that either was directed to the wrong subject as their images of Native Americans, or was derogatory in giving sympathy from a disingenuous place. So this is media put out, not intentionally saying we're coming at you aggressively. It's more of, hey, we kind of like who you are, or we just know about you, but we're just going to put something out anyway and not actually get to know who you are and actually put out a good, accurate representation of you. And a lot of the times that came out in consequences of, say, the hippie movement, where now people are assuming that all Indians are the same as hippies, or that they all wear headdresses and they all wear the headbands, which is so not true. And so it's just a lot of things like that go into people's misconception that just because I'm doing this, it doesn't have a big ramification. But when you start to pretend to be someone else and you are pretending incorrectly, and then other people see that and start to believe in that, then you've hurt that original people in a big way. It kind of sends the message that their culture is not important enough to learn like the real culture. And so this all goes back to the cultural misappropriation that I was saying earlier. It's the act of falsely representing Native Americans or any race through the use of media, stories, and press. And a lot of it I've already gone through. But one thing that I haven't touched on yet was like the parallels between that and blackface minstrel, where groups would put on plays or shows or skits supposed to be comedic, but they're at the expense of the person that you're pretending to be. And so where blacks were having black face paint put on white people, for Indians it's red paint, and they're putting these skits out. There was even a Bugs Bunny one where he's well, I guess that's actually just a different propaganda, so we'll scratch that. But anyway, there's a parallel between those two, and it's just interesting in the amount of movement forward for black folk in the country, and the parallel between how much work is being put into the same treatment that was done, to remedying the same treatment that was done to Native Americans. And all of this leads to cultural confusion. And what I was saying earlier, that when you misrepresent culture to the younger generation, they're going to take it as face value. And so you're starting to confuse younger generations on what an Indian is, and that's how we started with that comic, and that's done in sports with the Washington Redskins and the Indians, and then you have in TV and just in general society and summer camps where there's cowboys versus Indians. And I grew up watching these movies where, my family loved watching like a cowboys versus Indian movie in the modern era, where it was, that was just something you watched. Now I understand more of like how incorrect that was, and I just didn't even process at the time what was actually being done on screen. And it's just putting cowboys above, so putting the white man above the Native American. And then you go to summer camps where they're presenting again the culture and chants, but they're not actual Native American chants. They're just wanting to see something in the culture that's not actually there. And so that's also again in the cartoons. And so in conclusion, cultural misappropriation and racial antipathy towards Native Americans not only affected the past generations, but it's also affecting us today. And it's something that we all need to be aware of. And kind of the first step towards remedying that or moving forward is identifying and figuring out, okay, we need to start giving them a voice and letting them tell their own story. And a lot of times that's their biggest complaint towards the society today of cultural misappropriation, where it's like, we have our story, let us tell it. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. So I just want to thank you for a great semester and wish you well over the summer. Thank you.